An elderly couple just wanted to fix an old pocket watch for their grandson's graduation, but when they step into an exclusive jewelry store, everything changes. They're humiliated, dismissed like nobodies, and just 7 minutes later, the whole store is in chaos. Security is called, and a black Rolls-Royce pulls up outside. What happened next stunned everyone and rewrote the store's fate forever. Stay with me. This is a story that will change how you see people forever. Before we dive in, comment where you're watching from today. And if this story moves, you don't forget to subscribe for more now. It was just an ordinary morning, but an extraordinary destiny awaited. The morning sun filtered gently through the gauzy curtains of a modest farmhouse kitchen where the smell of fresh coffee mingled with the fragrance of blooming roses from the garden outside. Martha Reynolds, her silver hair neatly pulled into a low bun, poured a steaming cup into her husband, Joseph's favorite ceramic mug, the one with the faint chip on the handle that neither of them had the heart to throw away. "Happy anniversary, my dear Joseph," said his voice warm and rough with age. His weathered hands, toughened by decades of hard work, slid a small wooden box across the kitchen table toward her. Martha's eyes softened. 50 years of marriage, and he still looked at her like she was the only light in his universe. Curious, she lifted the lid. Inside lay a delicate wooden brooch, hand-carved into the shape of intertwined roses. The craftsmanship was intricate, each petal lovingly shaped, each curve deliberate. Her fingers brushed across it, feeling the tiny imperfections that made it more beautiful than any gem-studded ornament. "You made this," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Joseph chuckled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Been working on it for weeks in the shed. Thought it might match that Sunday dress you like." Martha pinned it to her blouse without a second thought, the lavender fabric framing the brooch perfectly. Her eyes shone with unshed tears. "It's perfect, thank you, Joseph." Despite being the founders of Reynolds Clean Technologies, a company whose innovations had changed the way the world accessed clean water, they lived simply. Their farmhouse was old, filled with creaking wooden floors and hand-stitched curtains, but every inch of it radiated love. Their vehicles were modest, an old, slightly rusted pickup for Joseph and a sensible sedan for Martha. They didn't own designer clothes, private jets, or sprawling estates. Their fortune built over decades hadn't changed who they were at their core. This morning, like every morning, they drank their coffee quietly, enjoying the simple ritual of being together. But today was special. It marked half a century of love, partnership, and dreams turned into reality. And there was something else. Something bubbling beneath the surface of their plans. "Our Timothy's graduation is next weekend," Martha said, stirring a spoon of honey into her coffee. Joseph leaned back in his chair, a smile tugging at his lips. 18 already. Hard to believe. "Our first grandchild heading off to college," Martha mused. "What should we get him?" Joseph reached into his overalls and pulled out a small gold pocket watch, its surface dulled by time but its sentimental value untouched. "I was thinking he's always loved this old thing. Maybe we could get it restored, maybe even customize it somehow, so he can pass it down someday too." Martha's face lit up. He would cherish that. They spent the next hour lost in ideas, engraving the family crest, setting a small sapphire on the cover, adding an inscription that only Timothy would understand. Their plans were not about grandeur or showing off wealth. It was about meaning, about passing down a piece of history steeped in love. Joseph suggested they visit Finest Jewels, the most acclaimed jeweler in the city. Martha agreed, mentioning she also needed to drop off a donation check at the children's hospital. It was a typical day for them. Quiet acts of kindness, simple joys, and an unshakable commitment to family. As always, they dressed as they usually did. Martha wore her lavender suit, well-pressed but several years old, and Joseph slipped into his denim overalls, a checked shirt, his sturdy leather jacket, and a gray fedora that had seen better days. "Should we dress up a bit more?" Martha asked, glancing at herself in the mirror. Joseph shrugged. "Why, we're just looking to fix a watch." Martha smiled softly. He was right. They had never been the type to chase appearances. Their journey downtown was filled with easy conversation about Timothy's bright future, the new rose bushes Martha wanted to plant, and Joseph's latest woodworking project, a small rocking horse for their youngest granddaughter. They pulled into the city and parked Joseph's old truck, whose paint had faded to a dignified dusty blue. As they made their way toward Finest Jewels, they didn't notice the sharp glances from people passing by. They never had. The world often judged, but they had stopped caring. Decades ago. Finest jewels loomed ahead, a monument of opulence. Massive crystal chandeliers sparkled behind towering glass windows. Marble floors glistened underfoot. Sleek black-suited security guards stood at attention, scanning every passerby with clinical efficiency. As Joseph held the heavy glass door open for Martha, he caught the faintest shift in the guard's expression, an almost imperceptible tightening of the lips. A narrowing of the eyes. It was the first crack in the polished facade of welcome. They stepped inside. Instantly, the air grew thick with the scent of expensive perfume and silent judgment. A security guard stepped forward, almost immediately, his body subtly positioning itself between them and the shimmering cases of diamonds and gold. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone polite but cool, already making assumptions. Martha smiled kindly. "We're here to inquire about custom restoration for a pocket watch." The guard hesitated, clearly sizing them up before nodding toward the reception desk without a word. At the counter, a young woman with perfect makeup and a diamond pendant that probably cost more than Joseph's truck looked up from her computer. Her initial professional smile froze when she saw them, saw their worn clothes, Joseph's weathered hands, Martha's simple brooch. Her eyes flicked briefly to a nearby colleague, exchanging a silent message that said, "Everything words didn't. These people don't belong here." "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, voice crisp like brittle paper. "No, we don't," Martha replied pleasantly, "but we heard you do beautiful custom work." The receptionist's fingers tapped lightly on the keyboard. "Custom projects require a consultation. There is a considerable waiting list. Our artisans are very selective." "That's all right," Joseph said with a small smile. "We're not in a hurry. It's for our grandson's graduation next weekend, but if it takes longer, that's perfectly fine." The receptionist raised one finely sculpted eyebrow. "Custom work typically starts at $20,000. Joseph simply nodded, unfazed. "That's fine." The young woman's mask slipped for just a moment, a flash of disbelief crossing her face before she caught herself. She picked up the phone and whispered urgently into it, her hand shielding her mouth. As they waited, Martha and Joseph observed the other patrons, men in tailored Italian suits, women in designer dresses, all dripping with the kind of conspicuous wealth that screamed exclusivity. It was a different world, one they technically belonged to but had never truly embraced. "They think we can't afford to breathe the air in here," Martha murmured, amusement dancing in her eyes. Joseph squeezed her hand gently. "Let them think what they want." Neither of them realized they had triggered a chain of events that would soon unravel the carefully curated illusion of finest jewels. Neither of them could have guessed that within minutes the laughter and whispers behind their backs would turn into stunned silence and desperate apologies. But for now they simply stood together as two ordinary souls in a sea of gilded pretense, waiting patiently for a little kindness that, as it turned out, was not to be found within those gleaming walls. And yet somewhere in the heart of this seemingly trivial humiliation, destiny was stirring. They had no idea, but they would know soon, and so would everyone else. It was supposed to be a simple errand, just a loving couple trying to restore a family heirloom for their grandson. But what unfolded inside that jewelry store exposed something much deeper than a misunderstanding. It revealed the fragile line between judgment and justice. Stay with me, because what happens next will not only shock you, it will make you rethink how you see strangers forever. Before we dive in, tell me where in the world you're watching from today, and if this story stirs something in. You don't forget to subscribe for more. Now let's step back into the quiet magic of that morning where everything still seemed possible. After deciding on their plan, Joseph and Martha finished their breakfast in an unhurried, sacred rhythm that only decades of shared mornings could produce. The sun climbed higher, casting lazy golden beams across the wooden floorboards of their kitchen, bathing the small house in a warm, timeless glow. Martha rose from her chair, smoothing the lavender jacket she had chosen so carefully. It wasn't new. It hadn't been new for many years, but it was her favorite. It fit her just right, not in the way expensive tailoring boasts, but in the way a second skin does after a lifetime of love and memories. The brooch Joseph had given her that morning glinted softly against the fabric, a small symbol of a bond 50 years strong. Joseph shrugged into his old leather jacket, the seams worn soft with time, his trusted gray fedora tilted slightly on his head. His overalls, clean but patched at the knees, were what he wore for nearly every occasion: birthdays, barbecues, even a few weddings. Martha gave him a look, half amused, half maternal. Maybe you should at least switch to slacks, she teased gently, reaching up to brush an invisible speck of dust from his shoulder. Joseph grinned, a mischievous twinkle lighting up his eyes. If I wore a suit, you'd think I was running for office, Martha laughed, a sound like a familiar song. Fair enough, let's go. The drive downtown was like stepping from one world into another. Their farmhouse sat on the edge of a sleepy little town where everyone still waved at passing cars and where the biggest event each week was the Friday night football game at the high school. But the city was noise and speed and skyscrapers stretching toward the heavens as if trying to touch something intangible. Joseph navigated his old pickup truck through the river of shiny new sedans and glossy black SUVs. The contrast was almost absurd, but he paid it no mind. His world wasn't built on appearances, it was built on substance, on promises, kept on a belief that who you are means far more than what you wear. As they reached the heart of downtown, Martha's phone buzzed. A simple reminder, Children's Hospital donation drop-off. She smiled to herself, thinking how Joseph insisted on hand-delivering their charitable contributions. It wasn't about tax write-offs or press releases for them or them. It was about seeing the place, feeling the mission, looking the nurses and the doctors and the tiny patients in the eyes and truly knowing where their blessings were going. Joseph found a parking spot a few blocks from Finest Jewels, and they set off walking hand in hand like teenagers, their steps slow but sure, each one a testament to the life they had built together. They passed boutiques with mannequins dressed in $1,000 outfits, bistros with menus scrawled in French, and art galleries featuring abstract pieces that looked to Joseph like spilled paint. Martha paused at a florist window admiring a bouquet of wildflowers. Joseph leaned close and whispered, "Maybe after we take care of the watch, we'll pick up some of those for you." Martha squeezed his hand. "You already gave me everything I need today." The sincerity in her voice was so simple, so pure, that Joseph felt a familiar tightening in his chest. Not sadness, but the overwhelming gratitude of a man who knew deep down he had somehow gotten life's most important choice exactly right. They crossed the street nearing their destination. Finest Jewels stood proudly at the corner, its tall, arched windows gleaming in the morning sun. The store's exterior alone exuded luxury. Polished brass door handles, marble steps, potted orchids flanking the entrance. It was a palace of wealth disguised as a retail store. Joseph opened the heavy glass door for Martha, and they stepped inside. Instantly, they were enveloped by a world so different it almost seemed fictional. The air was cool and perfumed with a scent that hinted of money and exclusivity. Crystal chandeliers scattered rainbows of light across the marble floor. Glass cases housed necklaces that sparkled like bottled starlight, and rings whose gemstones could rival the depths of oceans. At first, they were simply awed by the beauty of it all. The craftsmanship, the artistry, it spoke to something deep within them, a recognition of time and patience and mastery, values they deeply respected. But the spell was broken almost as quickly as it was cast. The security guard's glance turned assessing, then dismissive. The receptionist's smile faltered. Nearby sales associates cast sidelong glances at each other, the air filling with an invisible but palpable judgment. Martha and Joseph remained oblivious for a few precious moments longer, admiring a display of vintage timepieces that whispered stories of bygone eras. It wasn't until Martha looked up and caught the tightening of the receptionist's lips, the subtle but deliberate glance toward the security guard, that she realized what was happening. They were being measured, weighed, and found wanting. She touched Joseph's arm lightly. He understood immediately. Decades of facing life's hardships, side by side, had made words often unnecessary between them. Still, Martha, with her characteristic grace, approached the reception desk. "Good morning," she said warmly. "We're interested in having a custom restoration done on an old pocket watch." The young woman's professional facade slipped for a heartbeat before snapping back into place. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Martha said, still smiling. "We hope to speak with someone about a consultation." The woman's fingers danced over the keyboard, though Martha suspected she wasn't entering anything of importance. "Our master jewelers are extremely busy. There's a significant wait for custom pieces." "That's all right," Joseph said from behind Martha. "We're not in a rush." The woman's eyes flicked to Joseph's overalls, to the worn watch chain dangling from his pocket. She spoke again. This time, her voice dipped several degrees colder. "Custom work begins at $20,000. Joseph nodded casually, as though she had just quoted the price of a sandwich. "That's fine. The receptionist blinked momentarily, thrown off her script. She forced a smile and murmured, "One moment, please." As she disappeared into a back office, whispering urgently into a phone, Martha and Joseph stood silently, absorbing the undercurrent of hostility rippling around them. Martha leaned closer to Joseph, her voice low but amused. "They think we're lost." Joseph chuckled under his breath. "Let them think." Still, even as they made light of it, a small ache formed in Martha's chest, not for themselves, but for what this said about the world. How many people, truly good people, were dismissed every day simply because they didn't fit into a gilded mold? It wasn't about the money. It was never about the money. It was about dignity, about humanity, about the quiet, invisible battle waged every day between appearance and reality. They didn't know it yet, but the small ripples of discomfort gathering around them would soon become a tidal wave, and the entire city would bear witness. But for now, Joseph gently slipped his hand into Martha's, grounding her, as they waited in the marble and gold temple, simple and unshakable, in the face of silent scorn. Somewhere deep inside her, Martha made a decision, not out of pride, not out of anger, but out of something far more powerful: principle. She squeezed Joseph's hand once gently. This, she knew, was only the beginning. You think you can recognize true worth just by looking at someone? Think again, because what unfolds next will challenge everything you thought you knew about appearances and value. Stay with me, because this story is about to take a turn that even the staff at the most prestigious jewelry store in the city could never have anticipated. Before we continue, tell me where in the world you're watching from today. And if this story touches something in you, don't forget to subscribe for more. Now let's step back into that sunlit store where silent judgment was about to ignite a quiet storm. The seconds stretched long as Martha and Joseph stood in the middle of the showroom floor, the ornate chandeliers above them scattering prisms of light across the marble tiles. Around them, the store hummed with an invisible electricity, not the warmth of welcome, but the cold, charged tension of a room where people pretend not to notice yet cannot look away. A woman in a tight black dress, her fingers heavy with diamond rings, whispered behind a manicured hand to her companion. They both cast quick, appraising glances at Martha's modest lavender suit and Joseph's weathered overalls, failing to mask the smirks curling at the edges of their lips. Across the room, two young associates in tailored black uniforms huddled near a case of engagement rings, speaking in hushed, conspiratorial tones. One of them laughed softly, a sound not of kindness but of mockery, as she flicked her gaze toward the elderly couple. Martha saw it all. She registered every stolen glance, every whisper behind thinly veiled smiles, every slight twist of the mouth that spoke volumes louder than words. And yet she stood tall, her spine straight, her dignity untouched. Joseph's hand rested lightly on her lower back, a silent promise. "I am here. I see you. I stand with you." The receptionist returned her heels, clicking sharply against the marble floor. She wasn't alone. Trailing behind her was a man in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit, his name tag gleaming in the sunlight. Bradley, Wellington store manager. Bradley moved with the easy arrogance of a man used to wielding power without challenge. His eyes swept over Martha and Joseph in a single glance, clinical, dismissive. His smile was a weapon honed over years of filtering out the undesirables before they ever got near the serious merchandise. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice smooth as polished granite. "I understand you're interested in our custom services." "Yes," Martha said pleasantly. "We have a family heirloom, a pocket watch that we'd like restored and possibly customized as a graduation gift for our grandson." Joseph reached into his pocket and pulled out the watch, setting it carefully on the counter between them. The gold case, worn soft with time, caught the light and shimmered faintly. Bradley barely glanced at it. "And what sort of budget did you have in mind for this project?" he asked, his tone artificially bright. The subtext clear. "Let's see if you can even afford to stand here." Martha and Joseph exchanged a brief glance, one that said more than any spoken word. "We hadn't set a strict limit," Martha said evenly. "We simply want it done right, whatever it takes to make it special." Bradley's smile tightened, and for a fraction of a second his mask slipped, revealing the disdain underneath. He straightened his cuffs, a subtle signal of impatience. "Our artisans are among the finest in the world," he said. "Their work commands an appropriate investment. Perhaps," he continued, his voice dropping into the realm of patronizing condescension, You might find more suitable options at one of our sister stores, Timewise over on Fifth Street. They specialize in—" He paused, searching for a word that wouldn't sound overtly insulting, but still conveyed exactly what he meant. More economical alternatives. Martha's expression didn't change, but inside something sharp and cold was beginning to crystallize. "We're here because we heard you were the best," she said simply. Bradley's nostrils flared almost imperceptibly. Around them, the murmurs of other customers grew a shade louder. The woman in the black dress openly stared now, her bracelet-laden wrist dangling over the glass case. Bradley forced a laugh, a brittle, empty sound. Of course. It's just that, well, our custom work typically begins at $20,000 and projects often exceed that." Joseph nodded as if Bradley had simply informed him of the weather. "We understand." Bradley faltered, his script unraveling. For years, he had relied on subtle cues, clothing posture, accents, jewelry to sort potential clients from wastes of time. It had never failed him before. He cleared his throat. "Perhaps you'd like to see some examples of our vintage restoration work." He offered, already signaling to a sales associate nearby. "Miranda," he called, "please show these folks the entry-level collection." Miranda, a young woman with platinum blonde hair, pulled into a sleek bun, approached with the enthusiasm of someone being asked to clean toilets. She led them to a small display tucked into the farthest corner of the showroom. "These are our more accessible pieces," she said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. The watches inside the case were beautiful, but compared to the opulent masterpieces at the center of the showroom, they were clearly intended for those who didn't quite belong. Joseph bent down, examining the craftsmanship carefully. He asked questions, good ones, the kind that revealed a mind that understood the delicate gears and springs hidden inside those tiny golden shells. Miranda struggled to keep up, fumbling her responses. "Do you have any pieces that include custom gemstone work?" Martha asked. Miranda stiffened. "Those are part of our premium collection. Access is by appointment only for qualified buyers." "Qualified buyers," Joseph repeated, his voice soft but caring. "Yes." Miranda said, lowering her voice in what she probably thought was a kind gesture. "We just need to be sure of serious intent before presenting our most exclusive items." "And how exactly do you determine that?" Martha asked, her tone light but her words razor sharp. Miranda floundered, her polished professionalism crumbling under the weight of the unspoken truth. Before she could answer, a clatter rang out behind them. A tray of cleaning cloths dropped by a young associate. Everyone in the store turned toward the noise, the perfect cover for Bradley to make a subtle hand gesture to Miranda. "Wrap it up. Get rid of them." Joseph straightened, slowly pocketing the antique watch with deliberate care. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding," Bradley said smoothly as he reappeared, his hands clasped like a patient schoolteacher dealing with unruly students. "Our restoration services require a substantial deposit, $5,000, non-refundable, just to begin assessment." Joseph's eyebrows rose slightly. $5,000, just to look at it. Bradley shrugged, a pantomime of regret. "Quality assurance, we have to protect our artisans' time." Martha smiled, a smile so calm and cutting it could have sliced glass. "I see," she said. "Is that policy posted somewhere?" Bradley's jaw tightened. "It's standard for our clientele." By now, a small crowd had formed, pretending to browse but clearly eavesdropping. Whispers flitted through the air like mosquitoes. Someone tittered. A woman in designer heels whispered something behind a manicured hand, and her companion snickered. The atmosphere thickened, charged with the cruel amusement of a mob sending blood. Martha and Joseph stood unmoved, two islands of quiet dignity, in a rising tide of condescension. Bradley, sensing the moment of triumph, delivered the final blow. "Perhaps," he said, his voice pitched to Carrie, "you would be more comfortable exploring options at the mall. I hear they're having a sale on costume jewelry this weekend." The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to draw blood. Joseph's hand found Martha's again, squeezing gently, not as comfort, as solidarity. Without a word, Martha reached into her handbag, not for a credit card, not for a checkbook, but for her phone. She pressed a single button and lifted it to her ear. "James," she said, her voice steady and clear. "It's Martha. We're at Finest Jewels downtown. Could you and Edward meet us here? Bring the paperwork, please." She ended the call without another word, and then she smiled. Not at Bradley, not at the gawking customers, but at Joseph. 5 minutes, she mouthed silently. Joseph's eyes twinkled, understanding immediately. They turned, walking away from the glittering cases in the gleaming marble floor, and settled onto a bench just outside the store's enormous glass window. They waited. And inside, the staff of Finest Jewels laughed a little louder, mocked a little crueler, and sealed their fate with every poisoned glance. Because outside, destiny was already on its way, riding in on black leather seats and polished chrome, and nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same again. Sometimes the most powerful storms begin in silence, and as Martha and Joseph waited quietly outside the jewelry store, no one inside realized that the first tremors of an earthquake had already begun. Stay with me, because what happens next will shake the foundation of pride, prejudice, and judgment. Before we continue, tell me where in the world you're watching from today, and if this story is making you think twice about appearances, hit that subscribe button for more. Now let's step back inside Finest Jewels, where arrogance was about to meet its reckoning. Inside the pristine walls of Finest Jewels, laughter still drifted through the air, a poisonous fog of mockery and self-satisfaction. Bradley Wellington leaned casually against the polished counter, regaling two young associates with an exaggerated recounting of the encounter. She actually thought that little trinket was worth our master artisan's time, he said, smirking as he mimicked Martha's gentle voice with cruel precision. Can you imagine? The sales associates giggled, hiding their faces behind manicured hands. Miranda, standing a few feet away, forced a nervous laugh, her eyes darting uncertainly toward the entrance. Something in the way Martha had left so calm, so composed, unsettled her, though she couldn't quite explain why. Relax, Miranda, Bradley said, catching her unease. People like that come in all the time. Dreamers, pretenders. They think if they act important enough, they can fool us into rolling out the red carpet. Miranda nodded weakly, but a pit of discomfort had formed in her stomach. She watched the door again, almost against her will, a growing sense of anticipation gnawing at her insides. Across the room, other customers continued their own quiet judgments. A woman in a burgundy dress tried on a string of pearls, casting smug glances toward the bench outside where Martha and Joseph sat. A middle-aged man in a sharp blue suit leaned toward his wife and muttered something that made her cover her mouth to hide a snicker. The security guard Richard, who had initially approached the couple, now stood near the door, arms folded, his stance relaxed, confident that the problem had been handled. But outside, time was ticking down. Martha sat serenely on the bench, her hands folded neatly in her lap, while Joseph leaned back slightly, his weathered face turned toward the sky, enjoying the rare luxury of simply waiting. Across the street, the low growl of a powerful engine broke through the city noise. A sleek black Bentley glided to a stop at the curb in front of Finest Jewels, its polished body gleaming under the morning sun. The uniformed driver stepped out swiftly, moving with the practiced precision of someone long accustomed to high-stakes arrivals. He opened the rear passenger door, and a man emerged. James Thornton was a tall figure in an immaculately tailored suit, his silver hair perfectly combed, his every movement exuding quiet authority. Behind him came a younger man carrying a leather portfolio tucked under one arm. The sidewalk seemed to ripple with curiosity as pedestrians slowed to watch. Heads turned, phones subtly lifted to snap pictures. Martha stood with the elegance of a queen rising from her throne. Joseph rose beside her, slipping his arm around her shoulders. James approached with a respectful incline of his head. Mrs. Reynolds, Mr. Reynolds, how may we assist you today? His voice was low, cultured, deferential. Martha smiled warmly. Thank you for coming. James, we've encountered a small situation. Inside the store, Miranda pressed closer to the glass, her eyes widening. Who are they talking to? She whispered. Bradley followed her gaze, his smirk fading as he saw James Thornton, one of the top financial advisors in the country, someone whose name circulated in elite circles, like whispered legend, standing outside the store, speaking with the elderly couple he had just dismissed. Confusion creased Bradley's forehead. What could possibly be the connection? And then, before anyone inside could make sense of it, another vehicle arrived. This time a Rolls-Royce Phantom, its windows tinted deep black, pulled up behind the Bentley. The driver hurried to open the door, and from the shadowed interior stepped a figure every employee at Finest Jewels knew by sight, if not by personal acquaintance. Charles Harrington, founder and CEO of the entire Finest Jewels chain, strode onto the sidewalk. He was a man whose mere presence commanded attention, whose reputation for both ruthless business acumen and old-world charm had built an empire spanning continents. He spotted Martha and Joseph instantly, and his entire face transformed. "Martha Joseph," he called out, his voice rich with delight, arms outstretched as if welcoming beloved family members. Bradley's stomach dropped to his shoes. The entire showroom went deathly silent. Customers froze mid-brows. Sales associates stopped mid-sentence. Even Richard, the security guard, shifted uncomfortably where he stood. Through the towering glass windows, the scene played out like a theater production for an unwilling, captive audience. Charles Harrington embraced. Martha clasped Joseph's hand with both of his own, speaking rapidly, warmly, like a man greeting cherished mentors rather than customers. Bradley could feel the blood draining from his face. His throat tightened, and his hands began to tremble slightly. "Who are they?" Miranda whispered urgently, panic creeping into her voice. Bradley couldn't answer because deep down he already knew. Outside papers exchanged hands. James Thornton's young assistant produced the leather portfolio, flipping it open to reveal documents that Martha and Joseph signed with casual familiarity. Harrington reviewed the documents, nodded enthusiastically, and clapped James on the shoulder. The small crowd of onlookers that had begun gathering outside the store leaned closer to the scene, curiosity crackling in the air like static. Inside, the staff of Finest Jewels could do nothing but watch as the unimaginable unfolded. And then it happened. Martha, calm and composed, turned her head and looked straight through the glass window, her gaze locking onto Bradley. She lifted one slender hand and pointed directly at him. Harrington's expression shifted instantly from warm hospitality to a thundercloud. Without another word, Charles Harrington, James Thornton, Martha Joseph, and the young assistant began walking toward the entrance. Bradley took an involuntary step backward, bumping into the counter behind him. The world he had so carefully curated, the world of polished surfaces, careful appearances, and swift judgments, began to crumble around him with each measured step they took toward the door. The security guard hurried to open the entrance, his earlier smugness replaced by desperate deference. As the group crossed the threshold, the temperature in the room seemed to plummet. The glittering jewels no longer looked opulent. They looked cheap, gaudy, empty under the weight of what was coming. Bradley straightened his jacket with shaking hands, plastering a smile on his face that felt brittle as glass. "Mr. Harrington," he began, voice cracking slightly. "What a surprise." Charles Harrington cut him off with a look so cold it could have frozen fire. "Bradley Wellington," Harrington said, his voice dangerously soft. "We need to talk." The words hit the room like a gunshot. Customers stepped back, associates shrank into corners, and the air itself seemed to recoil. Martha and Joseph stood side by side, unbowed, serene in their simple clothes, while around them, the empire of arrogance trembled on its marble foundations. The reckoning had arrived, and it was only just beginning. Sometimes the greatest revelations happen not with a scream, but with a whisper, and what was about to be revealed inside Finest Jewels would leave every person present questioning everything they thought they knew about status, wealth, and humanity. Stay with me, because the next few moments will show you why appearances can be the biggest illusion of all. Before we continue, tell me where in the world you are watching from today, and if you believe respect should be given before judgment, smash that subscribe button for more. Now let's go back inside that glittering store where the ground was about to shake. The atmosphere inside Finest Jewels was electric, but not in the way it usually hummed with whispered bids and soft gasps over shimmering diamonds. No, this was different. This was the heavy charged stillness before a thunderstorm, when every hair on your body stands on end, waiting. Bradley Wellington stood frozen, his palms slick against the fine weave of his suit trousers. Charles Harrington's piercing gaze was locked onto him, and even without a raised voice or a single overt threat, the message was clear. Something catastrophic had occurred, and Bradley was at the center of it. Behind him, Miranda and the other sales associates shifted uneasily, their earlier amusement now replaced by the sickening realization that whatever storm was about to break, they were dangerously close to the blast zone. Martha Joseph. Harrington's voice, a rich baritone honed from decades of boardrooms and galas, softened slightly as he turned to the couple. "I am so terribly sorry if I had known, if anyone here had known." Martha simply smiled, a small, gracious thing that somehow made Bradley's stomach twist even tighter. Joseph, ever the rock beside her, gave a simple nod, his hands resting easily in the pockets of his overalls, the picture of quiet strength. "No need for apologies from you, Charles," Martha said, her voice as steady as ever. "You weren't the one who made assumptions." The words hung in the air, delicate and deadly. Harrington turned back to Bradley, his face hardening into something granite-like. "Mr. Wellington," he said, "do you have any idea who you just threw out of my flagship store?" Bradley opened his mouth. No words came out. He tried again, managing only a faint, strangled, I didn't realize." The silence that followed was deafening. "You didn't realize," Harrington repeated, his tone dripping with quiet contempt. "You didn't recognize Martha and Joseph Reynolds, founders and owners of Reynolds Clean Technologies. A company valued at—" He paused, turning slightly as if giving the crowd time to catch up. "Approximately $87 billion. The gasp that rippled through the room was almost physical, a tangible wave that seemed to buffet the very walls. Someone dropped a champagne flute, the delicate crystal shattering into 1,000 pieces across the marble floor. Bradley stumbled backward a step, pale as milk, his hands fluttering uselessly at his sides. "Reynolds Clean Technologies," Harrington continued, his voice now pitched for maximum impact, "whose water filtration systems are installed in hospitals, schools, and homes across the globe, whose humanitarian initiatives have brought clean drinking water to millions." He turned fully to face the room, now addressing not just Bradley but everyone, the sales associates, the whispering customers, even the security guards shifting uncomfortably by the door. "And these people," he said, pointing at Martha and Joseph, "these people were treated like common thieves in my store," mocked, humiliated judge. Martha remained silent through it all, her hands clasped calmly before her. Her brooch, a simple piece of hand-carved wood, catching the light and gleaming like a silent accusation. Joseph merely looked around the room, his gaze moving slowly, deliberately from face to face. There was no anger in his expression, only a deep, bottomless disappointment. I didn't know," Bradley stammered again, the words pathetic in the heavy silence. "You didn't ask," Martha corrected him gently. It was the gentleness that cut the deepest. There was a long pause as everyone absorbed the full magnitude of what had just been laid bare. And then, as if the universe needed one final brutal punctuation mark, James Thornton stepped forward, the young assistant by his side holding the now signed documents. "Charles," James said smoothly, "the paperwork is complete. The Reynolds Foundation has just finalized a $50 million donation to the new pediatric wing at the city's children's hospital." Another collective intake of breath. 50 million, just like that. Donated casually, without fanfare, without the need to dress up in designer labels or demand special treatment. Outside the massive glass windows, more bystanders had gathered, drawn by the luxury cars, the tension, the sense that something momentous was happening. Inside, Bradley felt as if the walls were closing in. "I think," Harrington said, his voice low and lethal, "that you owe Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds an apology." Bradley swallowed hard, feeling the eyes of every single person in the room burning into his back. I am deeply, terribly sorry," he mumbled, his voice cracking under the weight of his humiliation. "I made assumptions I never should have. I judged you based on appearance, and that was inexcusable." He dropped his gaze to the floor, unable to meet Martha's steady, compassionate eyes. Miranda stepped forward too, her face flushed crimson with shame. "I'm sorry as well," she said, her voice shaking. "I judged you unfairly." Martha inclined her head slightly in acknowledgement, her forgiveness palpable but not cheaply given. "We all make mistakes," she said softly. "The important thing is whether we learn from them." Harrington took a slow breath as if restraining a deeper fury. "There will be immediate personnel changes," he said curtly, "effective today." Bradley's knees buckled slightly, but he caught himself on the counter. The reality of his career imploding right here in front of customers, colleagues, and the entire internet, once the inevitable leaked footage made its rounds, sank in like cold water. Harrington turned back to Martha and Joseph, his voice warm again. "Now," he said, "about that pocket watch. I would consider it a personal honor if our finest artisan restored it for your grandson." Martha smiled, truly smiled this time. "We would like that very much, Charles," she said. As they moved toward the consultation room, the entire staff seemed to snap into motion, falling over themselves to offer the kind of genuine service that should have been their default all along. And still as they passed, the shattered remains of the champagne glass as they passed the customers who now watched them with wide, humbled eyes. Martha paused. She turned back, her voice carrying across the polished showroom floor. True wealth, she said quietly, isn't measured by what you wear or what you own. It's measured by how you treat people who have nothing to offer you. There was no reply, only silence, the kind that lingers long after the lesson has been learned. Outside, the city bustled on, oblivious to the tiny revolution that had just occurred inside Finest Jewels. But for those who witnessed it, nothing would ever look quite the same again. Because once you see true character revealed, you can never unsee it. Sometimes when one stone falls, it starts an avalanche. And what happened inside Finest Jewels that morning would ripple far beyond the sparkling chandeliers and marble floors, changing careers, reputations, and even an entire community's understanding of dignity. Stay with me, because this story isn't over yet, and the real consequences are just beginning. Before we continue, tell me where in the world you're watching from today. And if you believe true character matters more than appearances, don't forget to subscribe for more. Now let's go back inside that silent store where the world had just shifted and no one could pretend not to see it. The news spread through Finest Jewels like a wildfire in a dry forest. Employees who moments ago had snickered behind polished counters now whispered in frantic tones, their laughter curdled into fear. Customers who had stood smugly admiring their own reflections in the glass cases now pretended to browse, their eyes darting toward Martha and Joseph at every opportunity, shame blooming hot in their chests. Bradley Wellington stood like a man awaiting execution, his face drained of all color, sweat beading at his hairline despite the store's cool climate-controlled air. He hovered near the customer service desk, unsure whether he should flee or grovel, trapped in the purgatory of his own making. Miranda and the other associates clustered behind displays, avoiding eye contact, exchanging frantic whispers that sounded like the rustling of dry leaves before a storm. Meanwhile, oblivious, or simply choosing not to notice the chaos they had left in their wake, Martha and Joseph sat comfortably at a consultation table at the back of the showroom. Charles Harrington himself poured them each a cup of tea from a fine porcelain set reserved for their most prestigious clients. His demeanor was attentive, deferential, the way a king might treat visiting royalty. Across the floor, customers continued to pretend to browse, but no one truly shopped anymore. Their minds buzzed with the stunning revelation, the sharp sting of secondhand embarrassment, the gnawing realization that they had been silent participants in something ugly and small-minded. Outside, the scene had grown even larger. Pedestrians passing by slowed to gawk at the Rolls-Royce and Bentley, parked side by side in front of the store, at the suited men guarding the entrance like a secret worth discovering. Some even lifted their phones, snapping photos, sensing without fully understanding that something extraordinary was unfolding just beyond the thick glass doors. Inside, it didn't take long for the first whispers to leave the building. A young woman in designer heels, her shopping bag forgotten at her feet, was the first to tweet about it. Witnessed something insane at Finest Jewels downtown. Old couple treated like trash. Turns out they're billionaires who just donated $50 to the children's hospital. Bradley Wellington is done. Shash, karma, Shadad can't judge. The post exploded within minutes. Texts began to buzz in employees' pockets. Notifications popped up. News spread from the sidewalk into cyberspace like a lit match dropped in a pool of gasoline. Bradley noticed the shift almost immediately. A young associate nearby gasped audibly as she read her phone screen. Another pulled out his phone under the counter, frantically typing. The atmosphere in the showroom thickened with a new, sharper kind of tension, the kind that only comes when you realize your mistakes are no longer private. Miranda caught Bradley's eye and gave a tiny, helpless shake of her head. They were trapped now, not just in the judgment of the people around them, but under the merciless lens of the internet. Charles Harrington, still the picture of composure, finished arranging the paperwork for the watch's restoration. He discussed every detail with Martha and Joseph, the artisan, who would handle the piece, the timeline, the potential engraving options, with a seriousness and respect, usually reserved for multi-million-dollar deals. Martha listened attentively, occasionally glancing at Joseph with a soft smile that spoke of deeper joys than any luxury could offer. Joseph, for his part, seemed far more interested in making sure the inscription on the back of the watch captured the right sentiment for Timothy's graduation. It was, after all, not about the money. It never had been. When the paperwork was signed and the arrangements finalized, Charles Harrington rose to his full height, and extended his hand to Joseph first, then to Martha. "Thank you," he said quietly, "not just for your trust today, but for reminding all of us what real worth looks like." Martha squeezed his hand warmly. "Thank you, Charles, for seeing us not just today but always." As they turned to leave, a hush fell over the store like a heavy velvet curtain. Every eye tracked them as they moved slowly toward the door, past gleaming cases of jewelry that suddenly seemed gaudy and hollow, past employees who stiffened under the weight of their own guilt, past customers who dropped their gazes in shame. As they reached the entrance, the security guard Richard, who had earlier dismissed them without a second thought, sprang forward to hold the door open, his face an awkward mask of apology. Joseph nodded politely to him. Martha simply smiled, a smile that was kind, but carried the full force of forgiveness earned, not given freely. Outside, the sunlight struck them full on, haloing them in gold. The city bustled around them, unaware that something important had shifted here today. Something that couldn't be captured in headlines or viral tweets, but for those who had seen it, truly seen it, it was unforgettable. Inside, Charles Harrington turned to face his staff. His face was grim. "This store," he said, his voice low but resonant, "was built on a foundation of excellence, but not just in product, in service, in dignity, in how we treat every soul who walks through that door." He let the words hang in the air like a solemn vow. "And today," he continued, "we failed." Bradley flinched as Harrington's gaze pinned him to the floor. "Effective immediately," Harrington said. "There will be changes. Leadership will be restructured. New training will be mandatory for all staff, and every employee will remember. Respect is not a reward, it is a right." The words landed like hammer blows. "Dismissed," Harrington finished, turning on his heel and retreating to his office without another glance. Bradley sagged where he stood, the humiliation crashing over him like a cold, relentless tide. Miranda swallowed hard, blinking back sudden tears. Across the city, the fallout continued. By that evening, news outlets had picked up the story. Billionaire couple, humiliated at upscale jewelry store, teaches powerful lesson on true worth. Finest jewel scandal viral incident, sparks nationwide conversation about judgment and kindness. Talk shows debated the morality of appearances. Blogs dissected the timeline. Memes exploded across social media, some mocking Bradley, others lifting Martha and Joseph into symbols of grace and dignity. And in the center of it all, Martha and Joseph Reynolds, quiet and unassuming, sat at their modest kitchen table, back at the farmhouse sipping evening tea. They didn't watch the news. They didn't need to. Their work. Their message was already done. And tomorrow they would get back to planting roses, crafting wooden toys, and living a life that needed no validation from anyone. Because they had always known the truth. True wealth was not something you could wear, drive, or display behind glass. It was something you carried inside. And today, the world had caught a glimpse of it, unpolished, unpretentious, and more priceless than any diamond ever could be. Sometimes the greatest impact comes not from shouting, but from the quiet way dignity refuses to bend. And as Martha and Joseph's story rippled through the city, the country, and even the world, the real lesson was just beginning. Stay with me, because what happens next will remind you that true change doesn't start from anger, but from grace. Before we continue, tell me where in the world you're watching from today. And if this story is inspiring you even a little, don't forget to subscribe for more now. Let's return to that little farmhouse where something bigger than any scandal was unfolding. The late afternoon sun slanted low across the fields surrounding Martha and Joseph's home, casting everything in a warm golden glow. Birds flitted from tree to tree, and the scent of fresh earth and blooming roses drifted through the air. Inside, their kitchen remained untouched by the day's chaos, a sanctuary of simple pleasures. The old kettle whistled on the stove. A loaf of homemade bread cooled on the counter, and at the table Martha carefully wrote out a card in her looping, graceful handwriting. Joseph sat across from her, polishing the old pocket watch with a soft cloth. Even though it was already gleaming from the earlier inspection, neither of them spoke of the morning's events, at least not yet. They didn't need to. It hung between them anyway, heavy and inevitable, like the moment just before a first raindrop falls. Finally, Joseph broke the silence. "You think we did enough?" he asked, his voice roughened by age but still carrying that steady weight. "She loves so much." Martha finished her line, dotted the final period, and set down her pen. She met his gaze across the table, a small, knowing smile curving her lips. "For us, it was never about doing enough," she said. It was about doing right. Joseph nodded slowly, absorbing that truth the way he had absorbed all her wisdom over the years. Not hurriedly, not lightly, but fully. He leaned back in his chair, stretching his legs, his mind replaying the stunned faces and finest jewels, the silent shame that had hung heavy in the air as they left. The humiliation hadn't broken them, not even close. If anything, it had forged something stronger. They had reminded the world that worth could not be measured by fabric labels or bank balances or the gleam of polished shoes. It could only be measured by how one treated another human being. The evening wore on quietly. They ate dinner at the small wooden table Joseph had built decades ago. When they couldn't afford much more than lumber and nails, they sipped bud tea on the porch, watching the sky blaze orange and pink before fading into the rich velvet blue of night. And still the world outside continued to spin faster and faster. News vans had begun to circle finest jewels. Their satellite dishes pointed skyward, their reporters breathlessly recounting the scandal to eager viewers. Twitter was ablaze with hashtags, #respect, before judgment, #Martha and Joseph, and true. Wealth talk shows booked last-minute segments dissecting every detail of the story. Articles sprouted up across major news sites, each one trying to capture the quiet, devastating power of what had happened. And yet here at the farmhouse, all was calm. All was as it had always been. Later that evening, Martha's phone buzzed against the kitchen counter, lighting up with a call from Charles Harrington himself. Joseph raised an eyebrow as she answered. "Good evening, Charles." Martha said, her voice warm. On the other end of the line, Charles sounded weary but grateful. "Martha," he said, "I just wanted to thank you again. You and Joseph have taught us all a lesson we won't soon forget." "It wasn't meant to be a lesson," Martha said simply, "just a reminder." Charles chuckled, the sound roughened by a long, humbling day. "Well, reminder received loud and clear. I wanted to let you know we're starting a new initiative at Finest Jewels. It's called the Open Door Project. We'll be offering training not just on customer service, but on human dignity. Every employee will be required to complete it before they ever set foot on the floor." Martha's heart warmed. "That's wonderful news, Charles." "There's one more thing," he added. "We'd be honored if you and Joseph would come speak to the staff. Share your story, your perspective." Martha smiled softly, even though Charles couldn't see it. "We'll think about it." After the call ended, Joseph leaned over. "Are we really going to stand up in front of all those people and lecture them?" He teased gently. Martha laughed, a low musical sound that carried out into the darkened fields. "Not lecture," she said. "Just remind them that every person deserves to be seen." Joseph nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe that's what the world's missing. Fewer lectures, more reminders." The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Martha sat again at the table with a fresh sheet of paper and her favorite pen. She wasn't writing a speech or a statement. She was writing a letter, a simple letter addressed to everyone. It read, "True wealth isn't counted in the numbers on a bank statement or the size of a diamond. True wealth is in kindness, given freely, dignity extended without price, and respect offered without precondition. We all have the power to give these things away in abundance, and in doing so, we become richer than we can imagine. Every person you meet carries a story you cannot see. Choose to honor it. Choose to see beyond the surface, because the real jewels in this world are not hidden in glass cases as they walk beside us every day." She signed it simply, Martha and Joseph Reynolds. By the end of the week, the letter had gone viral. Charles Harrington had framed it and placed it permanently inside the entrance of every Finest Jewels store. Other businesses picked it up too, posting it in their windows, printing it on their employee handbooks, sharing it on social media. Talk show hosts read it aloud with tears in their eyes. Celebrities reposted it, praising its wisdom. Teachers printed it and hung it in classrooms. Parents shared it with their children. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, small changes began to ripple outward. Store clerks looked customers in the eyes again. Strangers held doors for each other. A waitress smiled a little warmer. A businessman tipped a little more generously. It wasn't a revolution. It wasn't even a movement. It was something quieter, something better, a reminder. Meanwhile, at their farmhouse, Martha and Joseph went about their lives exactly as they always had. They tended their roses. They baked their bread. They rocked their grandchildren to sleep under the witty, starry skies. And sometimes when they drove into town in Joseph's dusty old pickup, people would stop them on the street. not to ask for autographs, not to snap selfies, just to shake their hands, to say thank you. And every time Martha would smile, squeeze Joseph's hand and whisper, "It was never about changing the world all at once. It's about changing one heart at a time." And Joseph would nod, because he had known that all along. Sometimes the most powerful endings aren't about grand fireworks, but about a simple truth that lingers long after the last word. And the final chapter of Martha and Joseph's story is one you won't forget. Stay with me, because what happens next will leave you thinking about kindness, respect, and true wealth in a way you never have before. Before we continue, tell me where in the world you're watching from today. And if this story has touched you even a little, don't forget to subscribe for more now. Let's walk with Martha and Joseph one last time as their journey comes full circle. Spring arrives slowly that year at the Reynolds farmhouse, unfurling itself in cautious greens and tentative blooms. The rose bushes that Martha had planted decades earlier awakened from their winter slumber, scattering bursts of color across the garden. Joseph spent his mornings out by the shed, sanding the final touches on a small rocking horse for their youngest granddaughter. Life had returned to its familiar rhythms. The chaos that had erupted after their encounter at Finest Jewels had eventually settled into something quieter, something deeper. Martha's letter had made its way around the globe, translated into dozens of languages, printed on posters, painted onto murals, in schools and public parks. But for Martha and Joseph, the headlines and viral videos were distant echoes. Their focus remained where it had always been: on family, on community, on the kind of small, unnoticed acts that build a life worth living. One crisp Saturday morning, a letter arrived in the mail. Not an email, not a text, but a real old-fashioned letter written in careful handwriting. It was from Timothy, their grandson. He was away at college now, studying engineering just like Joseph once had. Walking paths that had been paved by the stories Joseph told him as a boy. Sitting on a dusty workbench, Martha opened the envelope, carefully unfolding the thick paper. "Dear Grandma and Grandpa," it began. "I wanted you to know that I carry the pocket watch with me every day. Not in my pocket, though. I keep it in the drawer next to my bed. I take it out when I'm scared or when I feel like giving up. Joy, I remember what you told me, that this watch doesn't just tell time, it tells a story about hard work, about family, about believing in something bigger than yourself. I want you to know that even though I'm far away, your story is part of me. It's in every blueprint I draw, every exam I take, every moment when I wonder if I'm good enough. I love you both. Thank you for believing in me long before I knew how to believe in myself. Love, Timothy." Martha wiped her eyes with the corner of her apron. Joseph sat beside her, silent but smiling, his hand resting over hers, steady as ever. In the afternoon, they decided to drive into town. There was a new coffee shop that had opened, and their daughter had mentioned it. Had the best cinnamon rolls this side of the state. Joseph steered the pickup carefully along the winding roads, the windows down, the spring air fragrant with cut grass and wildflowers. As they pulled into the town square, something unexpected caught their eyes. Across the street near the public library, a new mural had been painted across the entire side of a brick building. It wasn't a picture of a celebrity or a politician. It was a painting of two figures. An older man in overalls holding the hand of a woman in a lavender jacket, a simple wooden brooch pinned to her chest. They were walking hand in hand through a field of roses, sunlight streaming down around them. Above their heads in bold letters, the words from Martha's letter were written, "True wealth is in kindness, given freely, dignity, extended without price, and respect offered without precondition." Below it, smaller, "Inspired by Martha and Joseph Reynolds." Martha covered her mouth with her hand. Stunned, Joseph turned off the engine and sat quietly, letting the moment breathe. People were gathered around the mural, young and old, strangers and friends, reading the words, pointing, taking photos. Parents lifted their children up so they could see better. Couples paused to take it in their faces, softening. And for a moment, Martha and Joseph simply watched. They watched as their story, once so private, so ordinary, now stretched outward like ripples in a pond, touching lives they would never even know. Finally, Joseph spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "Didn't think we'd ever be on a wall," he said, chuckling quietly. Martha laughed through her tears. "Not bad for a couple of nobodies in an old pickup." They climbed out of the truck, moving slowly across the street, unnoticed at first by the crowd, but then someone spotted them. A young boy, no older than 10, tugging at his mother's sleeve. Mom, he whispered loudly. It's them. It's really them. Heads turned. Gasps rippled through the gathering. And then something incredible happened. No one rushed them. No one asked for autographs. No one shoved a phone in their faces. Instead, one by one, people simply approached and thanked them. Thanked them for the reminder. Thanked them for the lesson. Thanked them for being who they were. An older man shook Joseph's hand, tears in his eyes. A young woman hugged Martha tightly, whispering, "You made me believe good people still exist." A group of school children stood in front of the mural, reciting the words aloud, their voices sweet and clear. True wealth, kindness, dignity, respect. It echoed through the town square like a hymn. Martha and Joseph stayed for a while, listening, smiling, accepting every hug, every handshake, every tearful word of gratitude. And when the sun dipped low behind the rooftops, when the mural was bathed in golden light, they finally made their way back to the pickup. As Joseph started the engine, Martha turned for one last look at the painting, at themselves, at the life they had built, at the legacy they hadn't meant to leave but had left anyway. She squeezed Joseph's hand. "You think," she said softly, "maybe we changed a few hearts after all?" Joseph smiled, that slow, steady smile she loved so much. "I think," he said, "we just reminded them what they already knew." As they pulled away, the town square slowly returned to normal. But something lingered in the air, something unshakable, something beautiful, a reminder planted like a seed. And somewhere a child would grow up, remembering the story of an old couple who taught the world that true wealth could not be worn or bought or sold, only given freely, endlessly, and forever.